Hey everyone, my name is Mr. Cope, and I created the summer assignment for AP World History this year. And I know that some of you have been struggling with the first part and trying to figure out how do you go about taking some notes on that first part, linking it with the topic, specifically topic 2.2. How do you go about identifying and explaining, and how do you pick out evidence? So what you're seeing here, oh, and by the way, you can tell I'm a Pittsburgh Pirates fan, so it's a rather depressing summer for me. So, if you could get these notes done perfectly, at least there'd be one positive thing that happened for me this summer. Um, but what I'm showing you here is how I might go about structuring the notes that I'm taking. This is not the only way to do it. This is the way my brain functions, and you need to figure out how your brain's going to function. So let me take you to the actual pages that you've been using to construct this, and then I'll show you how I made the chart that you're seeing here in front of you. So the first thing that I look at is that topic 2.2. And if you take a look, I'm looking at this first thematic focus right here at the top on governance, sorry. And I'm specifically looking at historical developments right here. This empires collapse in different regions of the world, and in some areas were replaced by new imperial states, including the Mongol Khanates. Okay, so what you'll see here is I've specifically typed that into my first column so that I know this is the specific piece of evidence from topic 2.2 that I'm looking to cover. You want to cover all of the specific evidence that is found in each topic that we study, because that's the only thing that you can be tested on according to the College Board. And then I made a column right next to it where I listed identify and explain. And I did that based on what the definition of those historical thinking skills are. And specifically with the identify part on my chart, I'm really only doing this part here where it says identify the characteristics and traits of a concept, development, or process. And so how I know that I'm doing that is when you come back to this chart and you read these two pieces of evidence that I've included from the Mongol reading, they're just kind of basic facts. They're kind of highlighting this aspect right here in the historical development. You can see this first fact really goes in here and highlights that the Mongols created a new imperial state, and this one is talking about how empires are collapsing as a result of the Khanates. So those are really only identifying. If you notice, I didn't do this part here. What does the historical evidence tell you about a concept development or process? That wasn't found in the notes, at least in that section that I took. So really the identify part that I'm focusing on is right here. Okay. Now, the explain part, what I'm looking at here is this part right here, which is begin to think about how causation and patterns of, the second part here, using specific historic evidence to explain how and why historical concept development or process emerged, right? So I have this explain part right here, and you can see I took this quote and I typed it in because this is more of an explanation as to why did these things happen, right? This quote is explaining why is this going on. Okay, so let me show you where I got those quotes from. As I was going through the Mongol reading, I got to this section that was called The Beginning of Conquest. And you can see this isn't the first page. I'm just going along and I'm reading and I see here this first sentence, right, where it's talking about Genghis Khan and his troops going down and attacking the Jin Empire. Well, that's this first quote that I saw here. And then as I continued through this section, I got to this part where it says in 1219 the Khan conquered other parts of the world. So I added that in there as well because both of those things are identified. They're two different types of evidence that I would use to identify this historic development. So why I'm showing you this is I don't want you to just have one piece of evidence here. I want you to have all of the pieces that you think fit there. There should be at least one piece of evidence that fits there. However, you might see more as you do the reading or as you reflect on the reading. You might build in those to highlight that aspect. However, right before this last section, it said sometimes the Mongols wiped out civilian populations, and that part was the explanation part. So as I read that, I thought, oh, I should build that in as my explanation part. Okay, this is how I would structure my notes. And this is done so that I know that I'm covering all parts of the the topic that I'm looking to cover. So going back and looking at this topic, you need to have a piece of evidence that highlights this, a piece of evidence that highlights this learning objective, a piece of evidence that highlights this historical development, a piece of evidence that highlights this thematic focus on economic systems, one that highlights this learning objective, one that highlights this historical development, and then we go on to the second page, one that hits on this thematic focus, this learning objective, and this historical development. You can find these specific illustrative examples in the reading if you want and use those to highlight any of these if you'd like. And you can see there are some other illustrative examples up here of the suggested skills that you would be using. But the point is you need to have a piece of evidence for each of these 9 thematic focuses, learning objectives, and historical developments. They could be all identify, they could be all explain, they could be a combination of identify and explain. You could have more than one example, like I showed you here, where I actually have 3 examples for this historical development. Technically, the way it's designed, if you only had this explain part, you would meet the minimum requirement. However, I would encourage you to make as many connections as you can because that's where you're going to have that deeper and richer understanding. So I'm hoping that this tutorial video helps you see maybe a little bit more clearly what it is that I'm looking to have you do. There is no set way that you should do it. You can do it as I've identified it here, but you all are way more creative than I am, and you might have a better way of taking notes. You just need to have the identification of what are you talking about, the historical development, thematic focus, etc. Are you identifying or explaining, and what is the evidence that you're using? I'm looking forward to teaching you all this year. I hope you have a great rest of your summer and be ready to come in and work because we go from day 1 until the end of the school year.